Okay, this week we're going to be talking about designing for the small screen. Specifically, we're going to be looking at web page designs for mobile devices. Clearly, one of the first things to consider, and because this medium is a subset of the traditional computer, these are all considered limitations. But I should note, and what's interesting here, is that these are only limitations if we pretend the mobile device is a mobile computer. It's worth thinking about, however, whether they are just mini computers or whether the mobile device is in a category all to its own. The mobile user is not interacting with their device in the same way that a desktop user might. This is something that we as mobile media designers need to always keep in mind, and we will discuss this in later modules. Okay, so back to the design limitations, or perhaps design considerations. Of course, mobile devices have a significantly smaller display than their desktop counterpart, and most often we're talking like 240 pixels wide by 320 pixels high, or sometimes even smaller. Considering that in current web design for laptops and desktops, it's pretty much standard to design for 1024 by 768. This is a lot more screen real estate than what's available on a mobile device. So the next consideration is processing power. We've got somewhere around 2 to 3 gigahertz of processing power in our desktop machines, but like 1/10 of that in our mobile devices. So essentially, this means that we're going to limit the amount of thinking that the mobile browser has to do to render and display the pages. Less complicated scripting, less on-the-fly processing, less forms. Bandwidth is also limited. It's very slow. If you've ever tried to grab a full non-optimized page on something like the Singular or AT&T Edge network, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's slightly less so on Verizon's network, but wireless bandwidth has a long way to go to be a real media contender. So graphics need to be light and minimal in order to compensate. Next, we have to remember that data entry on a mobile device is pretty clumsy and pretty cumbersome. This is, of course, less so on a device with a full QWERTY keyboard, like a Treo or a BlackBerry, and now on devices like the iPhone, which potentially sits in a whole new category of its own. And we'll talk about that later in the Mobile Media Futures module. Because of these considerations, you really need to think through your designs. You need to envision the mobile user on the go, attempting to access and interact with your site. Are we giving them the information that they need? Are we cluttering up the display with too many graphics and hiding the real content? Just things to consider. Okay, so our assignment this week is to condense and optimize a current typical website's homepage into a mobile website. Later in the module, you'll see an example of Apple.com. I took their homepage and I used elements from that page to create a mobile version of their homepage. So this will give you an idea of basically what I'm looking for. There's also an animation in there, but you don't have to emulate that style. That was just for your reference. Anyway, what you'll find is that the mobile version that I built has been created out of parts from Apple's site, but I didn't use everything. Part of this process is understanding what the mobile user's needs are and what is extraneous data that is only applicable to a desktop user. Ideally, we do this in HTML with raw markup or using a specific style sheet that we've devised to format our content for mobile devices. But we're all coming from various backgrounds, so we can put this together as a full graphic using an image editor, like Photoshop or Illustrator, or perhaps even Microsoft Paint. And you might be able to do this in Microsoft Word, but I wouldn't encourage it. Try to stick with a traditional graphics application. You guys do all have access to Photoshop through Citrix, which is, I believe, at citrix.quinnipiac.edu, and you log in, and it's like you're using the applications, Photoshop, Illustrator, whatever you choose to use, through the web browser. So you can work with it through that system. Also, if you can make it to campus, you can use any of the machines in the library, which most of them have Photoshop, all the ones upstairs, and all the ones in media services. And if you don't know Photoshop, the people in media services and the library can definitely help you out. You can tell them that Sam sent you. They'll love that. So here are some guidelines that you should really follow when you're redesigning your page. Of course, use small graphics and a limited amount of them. This reduces the load time and declutters the page. Use text links, but keep them concise. Link lists are good. They're organized, they're clean. Keep other textual information short and to the point. That's not to say that mobile websites can't have larger, more thorough pieces of text, but remember, we're working with a home page, so lengthier text components can live on an internal page that we're not designing here. Make sure all of the content is relevant to the mobile user. For example, a mobile user doesn't need to know that your restaurant has a dining area that seats 100, but they do need to know your hours and your phone number. So when you're redesigning your page, feel free to cut, remove, shift things around. Put yourself in the mindset of the mobile user and ask yourself, if I was accessing this page from a mobile device, what would I need to know? And what would I need to know first? So also, think hierarchically. Put the important stuff at the top. The mobile user is going to be hesitant to scroll through a huge list of links because it's slow. So you're going to put the most important, most accessed links at the top of the page, ideally above the fold, or in that first chunk of viewable web page before you actually have to scroll. You can put the non-essential links at the bottom. This is the stuff that's nice to have on the page, but if a mobile user doesn't scroll down to it, they're not missing that much. This isn't necessarily something we're going to deal with in this assignment, but forms and data entry fields put a lot of strain on the processor, animations too. Not to mention that data entry is cumbersome on mobile devices, so try not to use them. Again, that's not to say that they shouldn't be there, just make sure they're relevant to the needs of the mobile user.